Hello and welcome to Project Oneness World. Today we are in conversation with Professor Toni Carbo. Toni is a Professor Emerita at the School of Computing and Information at University of Pittsburgh, having been a professor there since the fall of 1986 until her retirement in May 2009, and was the Dean of the school from 1986 to 2002. So she started a career in 1962 and she's still active, and it's been like 56 years and counting. And her work in the information field began in 1962 and includes extensive experience with information service producers and users, working both in libraries for 9 years and with database producers for 7 years, management and leadership, and with research and development in the areas of national and international information policy and information ethics. She has a Bachelor of Arts from Brown University and MS and PhD degrees from Drexel University. And she's a strong advocate of programs to increase diversity since the 1960s. She has worked with the late E.J. Jose from 1986 to expand diversity programs at the University of Pittsburgh's School of Information Science. And the school received the Chancellor's first award for minority recruitment. And she was the director of the first IMLS-funded ALA, which is the American Library Association Spectrum Doctoral Fellowships Program. And Toni has directed and been involved in several international research projects and has been involved in the development of information policies in the US and Europe. And she has chaired and or participated in the planning and implementation of numerous international conferences and workshops. Even within ASIS, the Association for Information Science and Technology, Toni has served in various roles within that, and was very recently awarded the Award of Merit, which is the highest award given out by ASIS. And Toni's research interests focused on pedagogy for information ethics, information policy, especially as related to e-government in the US, Europe, and Africa, and on information literacy. And today we are meeting here at the John Rockefeller Junior Library at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was really fortunate that we got this opportunity to connect, even though we both live in different states than Rhode Island. So thank you, Toni, for doing this. So to begin, could you tell us your story in your own words?
It's so wonderful to be back in Providence because that's actually where my work started back in 1962. Well, just briefly, I'm number 5 of 7 daughters, a wonderful family. Growing up in Connecticut, I came to Brown University to be a math major back in 1960 because I wanted to be an astronaut. I had great dreams of that. And so I unfortunately found out my sophomore year when a friend said, "Toni, you can't be an astronaut." Can't was not a word we heard in our family. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Only men can be astronauts because only military pilots can be astronauts and only men can be military pilots." And I thought, oh my gosh, how stupid that was in 1962. And of course, we've come a long way. Well, that was certainly one of the challenges. What did I want to do? I was a scholarship kid at that point, with a loan for room and board, and my other love was English and French literature, and that's not where you get big jobs. So the dean suggested I take a semester off and decide what I wanted to do, and then come back to Brown and pick up my scholarship. Turned out a friend babysat for the children of the editor of Mathematical Reviews here in Providence, Rhode Island. And I thought Mathematical Review was kind of interesting. I made an appointment with him because they were looking for some help in their library. Anyway, turned out it was a blizzard in Providence, but what did I care? I had this old black hat, not fur, but a warm coat, and a friend had just come back from Moscow and had this black fur hat, and he said, I had long, waist-long hair, and he said, "Toni, you have to wear the hat, it looks great." So I go trudging through the blizzard in this hat and this coat, and I ring the doorbell, and this man comes, editor A.J. Lowwater, his name was, and he said, "You're here." And I said, "Well, yes, sir, didn't we have an appointment at 10 o'clock? And he said, "Yes, of course, but I thought the weather would keep you from being here." Anyway, he invited me in, and we talked, and apparently he was impressed that I was determined, and I was there. Hired me to work in the library, and it turned out that the woman who headed, well, it was just a very small library, she was the librarian, was a rather large woman, went home on a Friday and had a baby, which was kind of scandalous in 1962 because she wasn't married. Okay. Anyway, so I got to run the library, which was fun. And every day I would go to the Brown Science Library that I had used as an undergrad to look up some references. And it turned out they had a job. So the next year I was hired at the Brown Sciences Library. Anyway, without going through all the details, I had the great pleasure of working in libraries. I spent 1 year at the University of Washington, 65-6, where I actually studied programming COBOL and Fortran and worked with their engineers there and at Boeing, and took 2 courses, and both professors said, go back and finish your degree. So I came back to Brown, finished my degree, and then had the pleasure of going to Drexel to get my master's. And as I was finishing the master's, the dean said they had gotten permission to start a PhD program, and would I be their guinea pig student? I like to be a pioneer, so I thought, why not? So I became their PhD student and got my PhD from Drexel as well, taking many of my courses over at Penn because I'd already done most of the systems and other courses. And I was at the Wharton Business School and took courses in management, organization theory, things like that. So it's a very interesting program. Anyway, in terms of other kinds of jobs I've had, I was so fortunate to work for NFACE, as it was called, because I had worked with an abstracting and indexing service, as they were looking at how do you create databases to make the information available. Again, we're talking 70s. And then after, I always felt 5 years was about the right time to be a director, went to England to work at the Institution of Electrical Engineers. And while there, the position at NCLIS, the National Commission on Libraries and Information Science, became open. And a dear friend and one of my mentors, Louis Villanos. Lou had been the associate director here at Brown in the library system, and he hired me, that's back in 1963, that would have been, to work in the Brown Sciences Library. And he had been a very good mentor throughout the years. So anyway, he came to visit my husband and me in Washington, D.C., and he said, you have to apply for the job at the University of Pittsburgh. And I thought, why do I want to be a dean? And he convinced me that I should do that. So I ended up being a dean at the University of Pittsburgh, which was a wonderful job.
So you did talk about various significant steps in your career. I think let me go back a little bit. And what was your childhood like?
Oh, it was a very interesting childhood. My father had a tree nursery. Also, it was called a tree expert company. So if power lines during storms get branches on them, his team would go out and clear that down. He had one of the early trucks with a little bucket in it to have people go up there. A very successful business. And we lived out in the country, as I said, Middlefield, Connecticut. I went to Middletown High School because our town was too small to have a high school. Very tragically, in the 50s, my father had gotten one of the new Cadillacs with electric windows, and he was tinkering with that. And on the ground next to him was a propane torch, which exploded, and his clothes caught fire, and he almost died. He panicked and ran upstairs in the house, which, of course, he should have, stopped, drop, and roll. He didn't think of that, and it was just horrible. He was in and out of hospitals for 2 years. They never thought he would live, and he did. He was an incredibly strong person, as was my mother, who was a nurse. And, of course, I had the 6 sisters, so it was really quite a time. And we went from being very comfortable, not millionaires, but very comfortable, to really having no money because he had the best insurance that you could get, but that didn't cover all the specialty nurses and the specialists to do the skin grafts and all of that. So we ended up really, not having much money. He had to sell most of the land. And as I was finishing high school, I said, it's okay, I'll go to one of the state schools and it won't cost us very much money, that's fine. He said, no, you won't. You're very good in math. You're going to apply to and get into the best university in the country that has the best math department. And I applied to Brown, and they gave me the full scholarship and loan for room and board. And so it's that kind of determination and having these interesting sisters. My father had been married, and he and his wife had a daughter. Sadly, his wife died of what was called consumption at the time. And then a few years after that, he married my mother, and they had the 6 daughters. So when I was born, my oldest sister was already not only married, but already had a son. So I was born an aunt, which was kind of fun. And interestingly, that brother-in-law, Emilio Quincy Daddario, very interesting man, was mayor of Middletown, Connecticut, which I was just in visiting family before coming here. And he was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. very involved in science and some of the early work within Congress in science. And then I have these other sisters, each of whom is unique. One was a history major, and her husband was an auto mechanic, and they bought a couple of companies and did very well. And she was very good in that area. She still is an amazing woman. The next sister is an artist who went to Rhode Island School of Design. The next sister was a nurse who was stunning, looked like our grandmother, dark hair, dark eyes, southern Italy. My grandfather came from northern Italy, tall, blonde, blue-eyed. Anyway, she went into modeling, and then there were 5 years till me. Then 2 years after me, my sister was born with very serious heart problems. They never thought she would live. She had something called the tetralogy defect, 4 major things wrong. Thank heavens, her doctor was one of the first people to do open heart surgery and was able to do that. And she actually ended up living to be 35, which was quite remarkable. Then my youngest sister was a special education teacher in public high schools. So what a diverse group of sisters, right?
It is diverse, yeah. And it's wonderful. I come from a large family too, and so I do understand the sibling dynamics a little bit better. And what number were you in this line?
Number 5.
You're number 5.
Now, there's an old myth, or whatever you call it, legend, that the 7th daughter can foretell the future, and the 5th daughter, which is what I am, has magical powers. I have never figured out what the heck they are, so I keep thinking, magic wand doesn't work. We'll have to find out what they are someday.
I think the magical powers are what it is then.
Must be.
Yes, maybe that is the reason for your success. You mentioned 1 or 2 names. So who are some of the people who have influenced your work?
Well, certainly my parents, that kind of attitude that they had, that we can overcome anything and we keep on trucking, as we used to say. Certainly Lou Vianos. Now, in elementary school, I had some really very good teachers. We went K-8 and then 9th grade. We didn't have middle school in those days. And I remember, for example, in I think maybe junior year in high school math class, we went in the first day in September, and he gave us these workbooks for the class. Very good math teacher. And I took it home and I did it, and I brought it in the next day, and I said, "Here it is, sir." He said, "That's for the whole year. You finished it last night." And I said, "Well, yes, it was really interesting and I enjoyed it." And he said, "Okay." He took it home, and he came in the next day and he said, "All of the answers were correct. You made one arithmetical error on this one question, subtracting." And he brought me a biography of Einstein. And he said he brought me different books to read. So here he was in a small public school in Middlefield, Connecticut, really helping each individual student. So he certainly helped other teachers I had there. At Middletown High, it was really wonderful. I had some incredible teachers. My Latin teacher, I had 2 years of Latin, 3 of French. The math teachers were really great. And it turned out that at Wesleyan University, which is in Middletown, Warwick W. Sawyer, who wrote some incredible books called What is Mathematics All About? Prelude to Mathematics, believes that you learn math by teaching. You learn by teaching. So he asked each of the high schools if there was a student interested in working with him. And I was selected from our school. And he was so amazing. So he had me teach algebra to 2nd graders. We didn't tell them it was algebra, but they loved it. And I found I was learning more and more about advanced algebra, which he was teaching me, and some calculus. And it was that kind of wonderful attention in a smallish town that made a huge difference. So those people, and then certainly several of my professors here at Brown. And then when I went to Drexel to get my master's, having the dean ask me if I would be their guinea pig doctoral students. I've had some wonderful people along the way who have encouraged me. They know I always like to try sort of crazy things and do something new and different.
Oh, that's wonderful. And do you want to talk about your shirt?
Oh, my shirt. Yes, indeed. Anyone who knows me, I lived in Pittsburgh 23 years. I bleed black and gold. Steelers, Penguins, Pirates. Well, I lived in Pittsburgh 23 years, as I said, most of them in a section called Squirrel Hill. And some of you may have seen on the news the horrible, horrible thing that happened when a person, I don't know his name, I don't ever want to know his name, took a gun and killed 11 people in the neighborhood I lived in, including 2 people I knew, not well as close friends, but one worked at the University of Pittsburgh, and another one was at a University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And what each of the teams in the town did was, in Pittsburgh, raise money and give it to the families of the victims. And the Pittsburgh Penguins, of which I was a season ticket holder for several years, did this logo to remind people that strength is stronger than hate. And that's the idea that we would not give in to the hatred, but the whole community rallied around the families. I made a donation, as many of us did. And so the Penguins sold these patches for $20. I bought a couple of them. And I think that is extremely important in turbulent times when terrible things are happening, that we remember that love is definitely stronger than hate, and that we continue to practice that. So I thought it'd be appropriate to wear for my meetings today at the Library Advisory Council, but also for this.
No, it is, and because the idea of Project Oneness World, right, is really it started off with a thought that I should interview people from different walks of life, and to bring about, because a lot of times what happens is that we see people as different, and we stereotype people based on just what we see. And once we start talking to people and once we start connecting with them, then we find that people are much more similar than different.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just this idea of trying to find the similarity between people is my main purpose of interviewing different people. And for people to get inspired with the life stories, and also to feel that if he or she could do it, then I could do it too.
Absolutely. Well, you asked about childhood and growing up and all of that, and I mean, I could go on for hours about that. But there is another major event that my younger sister, as I said, had heart problems. And so in our winter break, we would often, my mother and the two younger sisters and I would drive somewhere farther south, so it was warmer. And I don't know where we were, but we stopped to get lunch at some place. And I looked, and there were two water fountains. And one said white and one said colored. And I don't know how old I was, maybe 8. And I said, Mom, this doesn't make any sense. They're both white. And she told me why. There was one for white and one for colored. But people of color couldn't drink from the same fountain because they would taint it for the white people. And I was so outraged. And I said, that is absolutely wrong. And she said, you're right. And I said, and we have to do something about this. And she said, absolutely. And I don't want that sense of outrage ever to go away. And I won't let it go away. So I got involved in the civil rights movement in our small town, which was not very diverse racially, although different religions and such. And then in Providence, and I got very involved. I joined CORE, and remember so well being in our little tiny office in Providence when our 3 CORE workers were killed and bulldozed into a dam, and we stood there with our arms crossed, and still have to stop. Makes me, the tears come back. We sang We Shall Overcome, and that feeling of we are going to keep fighting this horrible, horrible hatred never goes away, and I don't want it to go away. So I've been involved in recruiting minorities when I first got to Drexel, and I looked around, I said to the dean, I was his graduate assistant, everybody here is white. We should have a much more diverse population within the program. And he said, Toni, you're right. And I said, if you will give us some money, I will help recruit students from other communities, and if you can give them fellowships. And he said, well, we do have some money. We'll target some of our graduate fellowships for that. There was one woman of color in our program, and I said, will you please help me? I mean, I can help do the logistics and put together materials and all of that. It would be wonderful if you would help go to the different communities and help us recruit. And she did. And we were able to increase our enrollment. And then, of course, in other places when I've been hiring, that always was a factor. And then going to the University of Pittsburgh as a dean, again, I looked around, very little diversity. And just before coming, the provost called to say that they had an opportunity to hire E.J. Josie. And I said, do whatever it takes to get him. I mean, he's incredible. Okay. So he was there. And then I worked that first year. We brought in 2 other people from underrepresented groups to be on our faculty as well. And the same way we supported students. And so we all have to keep up that fight. And it is terrible that we're still facing that. And to see such hatred against people because of their color or religion or gender or whatever, it's just insane. Anyway, so that fight doesn't go away.
So you talked about rooting out hatred, right? And we do have a lot of dividing still going on in various parts of the world. And I find that there are 2 kinds of people, one who seek to divide and the other who seek to unite. right? And both of these sort of coexist at a point in time. And both these feelings are also in us because the ego part of us is trying to be different and the love part of us is trying to connect. And we can use each one. It's about which of these faculties do we choose to use at a given point in time. So I see this as something innate to human nature, and it's just that we want more of the people who seek to unite people than the people who seek to divide.
Yes.
And what do you suggest we can do now, based on what some of the things that you've done in the past, in order to bring people closer together rather than seeing them as different or divided?
Well, first of all, as I always told my students in management and information policy and ethics classes, it's never a simple dichotomy. And each human is unique and complex. And so there may be a time in a discussion at lunch we want to divide people because they don't agree with us. There may be other times because we want them to help reach our goal or objective that we want to unite them. It is a lot more complicated than that. Well, the first step is to listen, one of the very hardest things ever to do. We're getting ready with our brilliant response to exactly what we know the other person's going to say. We don't listen to what the person is saying. So that's what I keep working on myself over all these years and trying to teach my students to do that, to stop and actually listen, not making assumptions about people. Just because somebody is fill in any blank, they therefore do this. One of the things I find very frustrating is as an older woman, I'm 76 now, therefore I must be feeble. So somebody has to help me walk somewhere. Or I obviously wouldn't know anything about technology. I'm riding on a plane one time and a guy takes out his tablet. And I look over to see what he has and he said, "This is a computer. We can make them very small now." And my responses immediately started thinking about what parts of him were quite small, very small, beginning with his brain. I did not say that. I thought I was going to say, what were you doing in the 60s? I was programming in Fortran and COBOL. I thought, no. And I said, oh, really? So rather than take on that fight at that time, I think some of it is deciding how much effort is worth it. I did not bring down my tablet, which I should have at that point. But sometimes, it's not worth the fight at that moment. However, part of it is demonstrating that we can do things, that we shouldn't stereotype people. Sometimes with a sense of humor, if we can help do that. And it does come back to the listening part and understanding that we are fundamentally the same and that life circumstances may have changed us, or somebody, whatever, with green hair was mean to us one time, so everybody with green hair is bad. That kind of thinking is absolutely wrong. It has to start from when people are very young, as much as we can. That doesn't mean we can't change. And I think by helping to educate people, by behaving towards them the way we want them to behave toward us, that can make a real difference too.
And that person with green hair must have been mean at that particular point in time and must have forgotten about it by that evening and moved on.
Very possible.
And we just hold on to that moment, using that moment as an image of that person for life.
And that's not right at all.
Right. So what have been some of your biggest challenges?
Well, as I've said to a couple of people, I cannot wait to never hear the first woman anything again, because it is so common. And so a lot of the jobs I've had, a lot of the things I've done, it's the first woman ever to be executive director of NCLIS at that point, or dean of the school at Pitt. There still hasn't been another woman dean after that. And so some of it is that. I talked to one of my mentors, a woman named Doreen Boyce, and very often she would be named to a board in Pittsburgh, and she was the first woman to be on the board. And if she were asked to go onto a board, she would say, "I'm very happy to accept your invitation to serve on the board. I insist that there be a second woman who be named to the board at the same time." And they would do that. So some of it is overcoming these kinds of challenges of being stereotyped because you're fill in any blank, female, or girls aren't good in math, that kind of thing, or older. When people offer to help, am I okay to walk down onto the airplane, down the way up? Yes, I'm fine, thank you. And I try not to be annoyed about it, but because they're trying to be nice. So some of it is demonstrating. Obviously, teaching children from early on, and trying without being mean to somebody to have them understand that they're not treating someone fairly.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not a preacher.
No. I think these are
So demonstrate by action and by attitude, I guess.
And the attitude, yeah. So this is a big question, and I know that we talked about this. So what does happiness mean to you?
That's a hard one. Well, it begins with my family. I mean, my sisters, obviously, but I have an incredible daughter. I'm so very proud of her. She is so wonderful and loving and 40 years old. She looks a lot younger. And tragically, she has rheumatoid disease and other related diseases. And it is so hard to see her suffer, to see the pain she is in, the tremors in her hands at times. And she is a trooper. She just keeps on going. So she is very much part of my happiness. I just would do anything. Let me be the one taking the pain and suffering, not her. And grandchildren. There's nothing that brings more happiness than grandchildren, because it's all the love that you have for your own child. I wanted 3. I got just one terrific one, daughter. And then when the grandchildren come, it's the love of the child as well as the love of the grandchildren. So one is an incredible 14-year-old who is a fine student and an extremely fine hockey player of all things. He's in Detroit right now. There are professional teams trying to recruit him right now already, where he would go to he's going to go to a private school there, and he gets to play hockey and work with junior teams. Then a 6-year-old granddaughter and a 3.5-year-old granddaughter. Happiness is clearly family love. Happiness is sharing, doing something to help somebody else that makes them happy. So it's whoever said the more love is, the more you give away, the more you have. And I think there's clearly that. And if you can do some small thing that brightens a person's day or helps that person, that's what, to me, it's that. And certainly I've had wonderful happiness in my jobs. So I'm so lucky to have an incredible family, generally very good health, except for the silly allergies. And, of course, family first. And dear friends I've known for many years. Sadness comes when we lose them, and try to keep their memories alive and remember them as we do things, and think, now, what would she have done? Or, what would Louis tell me to do now? That kind of thing.
And in my own experience of having known you at ASIS&T, the Association for Information Science and Technology, since the past 10 years now, and we have co-served in juries and worked in some capacities together, and I've also seen you be part of the silent auction each year, and you've always been a very strong mentor and role model. And every person I speak to at ASIS says, "Oh yes, Toni, like she's wonderful," and Toni is always a mentor. And so the feeling I have is not mine alone. I see that feeling being shared by any other person that I speak to about you. They all see you as that role model who's always there, ever active to help. And I think you embody the kind of person that makes ASIS what it is, in terms of a professional home to a lot of people, both the older people as well as the new members joining. So what drives you to be a mentor and this role model?
Thank you so much for the kind words. The first time I went to ASIS, I was a master's student at Drexel. Michael Buckland was there, and he on our name tags we would have ribbons, first time attendee student. And he came up to me and he said, "I see you're a student." And he said, "Come sit down, let's talk." And he had a couple other people join us who were, my idols. I'd read their works and such. And that was such a fine role model. And I've known him since then. And he and I sat between him and Marcia Bates, another role model. And I always wanted to be like them. The idea that they helped me so much, and other people did it, my teacher in elementary school and other people who have done that, Lou Vianos over the years. So to try to help each person, that's one of the things that brings me happiness. I go to the conference, I look for those new first-time attendees or students, and I talk to people. I learn so much from them. So I ask, what brought you into the field? What is it you're interested in doing? And sometimes there's something I can do to help them, and which I'm always happy to do. It keeps you young, I think. 2 of my aunts will be over 100, so who knows? And I think that that's very important, because recognizing I'm not better or anything. I've been around a lot longer, so I've had more experience to do things. getting to talk to someone and listening carefully. I've learned so much from students. And I'll ask them, what are they thinking of doing in the future? I will try to give a little advice, like if it's a job you're completely ready for it, don't take that one. That's one you should have had 5 years ago. Take one where you're going to learn and grow, and that's partly what Louis told me. So passing on knowledge and wisdom from other people. And it's the vitality, you talk to nice young people, and they don't have to be young just in years. It may be a first-time attendee who's whatever years old.
Right.
And that's one of the things that makes ASIS so special. It is very like a family. I remember years ago, one of my colleagues, Jerry Sofar, his wife had died. I'm sorry, a member of his family. I'm forgetting exactly which one. And he came to the conference. And I said, I'm surprised that you're here. It's so good to see you. And he said, this is my second family. And that's exactly how I feel. Because people are nice to me. They talk, they listen. And the special interest group that we started, Michelle Manu really started years ago on international information issues. And that helped bring in more people from other countries. We learned so much about other cultures. And then we started the reception and the silent auction. So we would all donate things. I'd bring pieces of jewelry, nothing fancy, and then we put a little slip there and a suggested starting bid of $2 or $5, and people bid on that. And the funds that we raise help to pay for the dues for people from countries that can't afford to pay, and that way they get the publications, or they can't get hard currency out of their country. Also for the international paper contest that we have each year. And the winner of that gets funding from those funds to get to come to the conference, which is great. So it's that kind of sense of community that makes such a difference. And I strongly encourage people to go to an ASIS conference if you can. And we were in Vancouver this year. Next one will be in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I got to get some miles for airfare. And the year after that, I'm not sure it'll be in the U.S. and they're looking at different cities. It is such a wonderful community of people of all different specializations. Yes, a lot of computer science people, other people like me interested in ethics and policy, and the whole session. Our conference this year was focused on values and ethics.
Yeah. So, and you just received the highest award from ASIS, the Award of Merit.
Yes.
And you received other awards from ALIS and other associations. And how do you reflect on this journey? I know you talked about family, and I was wondering that here is a woman who has achieved so much in her career in so many different ways. And the career did not come at all when you talked about happiness.
No,
it did come, but yeah.
Happiness very much has involved a lot of the jobs I've had. It's the people so much, to be able to work in a library or another area where somebody has a question, you can actually help them get the answer to the question that they want, or help them figure out what they're really looking for. One of my favorites, somebody came into the library one time and was looking for information about medical programs. And I said, well, certainly, can you tell me a little more about it? Is there an article you've read that would be a bit, that would help me understand it? We chatted a little bit, and I said, oh, you're talking about here on campus. And it turned out what he wanted was the phone number for the nursing student dormitory.
Okay.
So part of it is being hesitant to tell somebody the question you have, and because you might offend them, or he didn't want me to know that he was looking for a phone number. But once we get through that and understand what they really wanted, to be able to give it to the person, that is a wonderful sense of accomplishment. I'll never forget working at the science library one day when one of the faculty I'd worked with frequently, he came in, and I would always look for articles as they came up, and he said, Toni, we won the award. I said, we won the award? One of his papers was won a very big international paper award. And in his comment, he had acknowledged my help in the library, which was very nice. A lot of people do that in a footnote, and these doctoral students help me and all that. But our paper, it's just that wonderful sense. So yes, it has brought me much happiness in the career. I've deviated from your question, though.
My question was, how do you reflect on your journey?
And that is what I'm doing, I guess. It's the people part. It really is getting to know people, finding out what their interests are, trying to help them get the information they need. And yes, it's wonderful when somebody thanks you and you've got a footnote in an article. That doesn't matter anywhere near as much as having that person. You look at the face and if you found something that they were looking for, and it's really going to help. And I don't just mean scholarly work. It may well be a question related to ethical issues. And one of the courses that I taught after Stephen Almagno and I developed it at the University of Pittsburgh, Information Ethics. I loved teaching that course. So often people would say, I never thought about that. For example, at an ASIS meeting one time, we had a session and we had bulletin boards and people could put little notes up and questions and all of that. We're sitting around in small discussion groups. And this one woman got up from China and was speaking about the censorship that was taking place and not getting access to the internet and things like that. And the man next to me had his phone up and he was capturing it on video. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm recording this. This is really interesting. And I said, and what are you going to do with it? Well, I'm going to put it up on my website on Facebook. I said, do you have any idea what that could mean for this woman? Her parents could be killed back there. She could have all kinds of threats and problems. And he said, oh, I never thought about that. Sorry, I won't do it. Yeah. And part of it is our job is to help them think about that. Yes. Think about the implications.
Before we tag people, before we tweet their pictures, so everything has to be based on consent and permission.
Yes, and what I would tell people, just because we can doesn't mean we should. So think about the implications. In the ethics class one time when I was teaching on campus but also online, when the paper, Assange, it's Assange who released a lot of the documents, right? Yes, sorry. And one of the students said, that's great. All of this should be made available to anybody. There shouldn't be any confidential classified material. One of the students immediately responded and said, my son is in the military based in a place that people didn't know we had American troops. His life is now in danger because that place has been made available, that information about where our troops are. And the first student said, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. So again, it's, thinking about it in advance.
That's a lot of things, yeah. So what are your goals now?
That's a good question. I want to stay active. I think that's important in the profession. I don't mean working, teaching a class, although I miss teaching. Being on the Library Advisory Council here for Brown is tremendously rewarding and helpful. Staying active in ASIS and helping new people come along and encouraging them in any way I can, sharing some information from the past if that's helpful. So ASIS and the Brown LAC are my two major groups. The AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Coalition for Science and Human Values is tremendously important. And I want us to I'm the representative from ASIS, but I've been asking, please let's find a replacement. Any organization can send two. Let's find somebody new to take over that, and I'll work with the person to help them transition in, meets twice a year in Washington, and then that person can take over and they can find a new second person. But that work is very, very important. Obviously, continuing to work with my family and my wonderful grandchildren, helping my daughter, supporting her in any way I can. So obviously continuing to be able to live and help my daughter in terms of watching my granddaughter, that kind of thing. And people have been after me to write some things down, not to write an autobiography. I mean, boring. But I realize there are some things that I've been so fortunate to be there. So maybe putting some of that down and some of what my grandchildren are asking for. What was it like, the kind of question, growing up in the big family out in the country, that kind of thing. So that, recording some of that, and you're so kind to invite me to do this interview. I appreciate that.
I think it's sort of a recording as well in some senses.
Yes, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So what mentoring advice would you have for people who might follow your footsteps?
Well, if you are interested in being a mentor, some of the basic things like, at a meeting, look for those first-time attendees and student tags and go up and talk to the person and ask questions and really listen to them. Don't try to preach and say, here are the 3 things you must do. Each person is different. But trying to listen and understand what that person wants, maybe a few things, like don't take the job you're fully prepared for. You got to learn and take a little bit of risk while understanding it's their decision. Suggesting other people, when somebody says, I'm really interested in this area, then I think, who are the people I know who are experts in that area, and suggest they talk to them. And if it's at a conference, I'll often say, oh, there's Joe over there. Let's go talk to him. So I'll introduce the two and make that initial connection. Those seem to help a lot. And I don't mean just face-to-face, although face-to-face really is still the best, especially being Italian. I gotta see the gestures. But it can, of course, be done online. And that's one of the challenges I think we all have, is too much time looking at devices, whether it's a cell phone or being on Facebook or whatever. I used to kid that how many cute cat videos can anybody see? It's a lot more than that. And especially when some of it is so disturbing. So you look at the news and it's very depressing. So we have to be a little bit censored for ourselves, so we're not at the end of the day thinking, oh, it's a horrible world. But looking at some of the positives.
And it's not all that horrible world. It's just what is covered in what we look at.
Yes, exactly. Right. That's what I'm saying. That, to be careful as we're going on Facebook, not to get caught up in some of the really negative things.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Toni. This is wonderful.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you again for asking me. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Toni.
Please excuse my voice. I have allergies, so I don't have my full voice. Hope that's not rain. No, it's the heating system. Yeah. Well, let's see. 7 hours later, I'd still be talking about it.